Maness has a lifelong record of providing dedicated service to this nation. Having worked his way up from the enlisted ranks to full colonel, he served our country for more than 32 years. He has served as a bomber squadron commander, bomb disposal technician, Joint Chiefs of Staff Operations Officer, assisted the National Security Team with the campaign plan for the global war on terrorism. He authored the first theater nuclear war plan and served as the Vice Commander of America's largest airborne intelligence wing. Colonel Rob Maness is a true American hero. This is Rob Maness Live.
James, you mentioned the term woke right. It's a term you and I have both used, but it'd be interesting to talk about it for a number of reasons. But first of all, what do you mean by that term? Because a lot of people are very confused about it.
Yeah, it's not necessarily the best term. It's more accurate to I don't use the word woke too, I use it a little too casually still, generally speaking, but I've tried to be very specific when it comes to it, to use the phrase woke Marxism, as in that it's a species of Marxist thought, yada, yada, yada. So we can very easily place that on the Marxist left, right? Well, woke right, another term that might work for that is woke fascism. And just like woke Marxism is technically woke neo-Marxism, this could be called woke neo-fascism. The more syllables.
Why is it woke?
Well, that's what I wanted to get to. So there are kind of two ways to look at why it's woke. And one is kind of philosophical and one is practical. The practical side is look at how they behave. They behave exactly like the woke. There's the targeted influence campaigns. There's the manufacturing of what the postmodernists called legitimation by parology or whatever. They create the illusion that there's massive support for this and massive distaste for that, using social media manipulations like we just talked about. They are highly invested in identity politics. The answer for them to leftist identity politics is a reaction identity politics or reactionary identity politics, equal and opposite, or in biblical terms, answering evil with evil, which the Bible says not to do, by the way, very specifically. And so there's this, grievance identity. Everything's bad for white Christian men, straight white Christian men. We're the oppressed minority under this. There's
identifying and defeating the woke right. Welcome back to Training Tuesday. The Rob Maness Show is live on Amazon Fire, Apple TV, Roku, YouTube, our Rumble channel, and World YouTube, and our X Spaces simulcast. Well, the woke right is a term that has emerged in political discussions recently to describe this segment of conservative or right-leaning individuals or groups who adopt certain rhetorical styles, strategies, or cultural critiques typically associated with the progressive or woke left-wing ideology, just like you just heard. Grok says, and I used Grok to look it up, it says it's a paradox just a bit because it says to think of it as conservatives borrowing from the progressive playbook, but flipping the script to fit their own values and goals. I'm not so sure I agree with that. But at its core, the woke right critiques what they see as excesses or hypocrisies in the liberal culture, their institutions, policies, and they're often using the same language of justice, oppression, or moral superiority that's more commonly rolled out and wielded by the left. For example, they might frame traditional values like family, religion, or national identity as under attack by a dominant woke elite, casting themselves as an oppressed minority, fighting back against cultural erasing. It's less about policy specifics and more about a vibe, a way of signaling that they're awake to some perceived societal scam, just not the one the left is focused on. And none of this sounds particularly dangerous, but it is. The right's version of wokeism could be headed toward a fascism and totalitarianism that is just as dangerous to Americans or more and our core values of life, liberty, and property as the woke left's Marxism and communism are. My guest today is that man in the video, Dr. James Lindsay. Dr. Lindsay has been a leader in identifying and countering cultural Marxism, neo-Marxism, critical race theory, woke ideology, DEI policies, and many other of these totalitarian philosophies that have been implemented right here in the United States of America for many years now. He's a leading voice in this discussion about the woke right, and essentially sounding a warning about where we could be headed if we don't gain a solid understanding of the concept and its dangers very soon. I like his X bio. It's very instructive for our discussion today. It says that he's a perennial outsider. He's canceled by both sides. He's pro-America, he's anti-communist, he's anti-fascist, and he's based as, well, you know what the F stands for. Liberty first. Dr. Lindsay, James, welcome back to the Rob Maness Show.
AF stands for Air Force, sir. Obviously, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it does. Hey, thank you so much for coming on. I know you're extremely busy, but I've been observing this, as I told you when I saw you a few months ago, from the sidelines, kind of for several months now, throughout the last year and the campaign and everything. And I'm like scratching my head at first, going, "What the heck is woke right?" I mean, you explained it in the clip there, what you were thinking, some of it, but what led you to this? Did you have like an aha moment or something where you married it up with what you were seeing from the left?
I got my first taste of it actually over 4 years ago. A lot of people, think this kind of popped out of the ground in the last few months. That was 4 years. Of course, let me back up before my story. 4 years ago, we all remember from Trump's first term that there was this phenomenon, and leading up before Trump's first term, that there was this phenomenon people called the alt-right. So if you need a short version of what I mean by woke right, it means alt-right. We're not allowed, which was short for alternative right. You're not allowed to use the word. Well, you're allowed to. You can call people alt-right now, but it doesn't work. It doesn't do anything. The left ruined that word. So just think of it as a new word for the kind of the same thing, to make it clear. But so we had encounters. All of us had encounters with that back 8-10 years ago. Whether it was the kind of Jared Taylor types coming out with a new white supremacy model, whether it was, David Duke, whether it was whatever guys, I guess, the Pizzagate thing and all of that mess, and this kind of new radical right. And then the left accused everybody who was a conservative of being some member of this nonsense, and everybody thought it was just some big joke. And it wasn't a joke. It kind of went underground, and it kind of blended in with MAGA, and for the most part, didn't do too much of its nasty offensive, whether it's racism, whether it's pro-patriarchy, anti-women, whether it's, I guess the biggest ugly thing right now is the anti-Semitism has come up to a fevered pitch. It didn't do too much of that. And then really, in the summer last year, as the closing days of the election season were coming upon us, late summer, early fall, before the 2024 election, they sort of erupted back onto the scene, especially on social media. But I had my introduction to these people up close and personal in January 21. So I went to a conference. So this is supposed to be a professional thing. It's during COVID, so there wasn't a lot of people there. There wasn't a lot of people doing anything. But we had this little conference, or somebody had a little conference. The Claremont Institute had me come out for a little conference. And there was a young gentleman there whose name I don't know. I never got it, and I wouldn't remember it anyway, who told me, long and short, after explaining Hitler knew how to get rid of communists and all this right-wing extremist point of view, and we need a civil war in this country to put an end to this. And I asked him if he'd fight in the war, and of course he said no, he'd make memes. And this young man eventually said, well, I just want to make it really clear, your work has been very useful to us on the radical right, so we're going to let you keep doing it. But when the point comes when we take power, we're going to force convert you or kill you. And so I thought, well, these are people to pay attention to. And so I kept an eye on this, and I watched them. Some of the people I met at the conference, some of the other people that were associated with them, I kind of started to put together a little bit of a who's who map of this kind of loose group of people. And I watched them start to build infrastructure and move into kind of establishment positions within the conservative movement. And I watched them get funders and build out, like I said, infrastructure. I also watched them grow among young men. And then this kind of side shoot off of it was this Christian nationalist movement. And since I do so much work with the evangelical community, I was watching this Christian nationalist movement grow. Of course, I was following what the Biden White House and the select committee against January 6th was saying about Christian nationalism. And I thought, well, this is a giant setup to discredit MAGA. And so I was kind of following these guys and I was reading the stuff they were putting out. And so I've been kind of tracking it for 4 years or so. And then when everything started to get hot about September, October last year before the election, I was like, oh my gosh, these guys are going to make a real bid for power with the election. Either Trump loses and they're going to try to throw the Civil War, or Trump wins and they're going to try to take over the administration from within by filling as many positions as they can. So I decided to call it out and started talking about it. I had talked about it some, but I started talking about it much more vigorously and trying to expose it much more thoroughly.
Yeah, and I think that's what got my attention was the responses. I mean, people that I kind of casually follow on Twitter and all that stuff. All of a sudden, these messages start popping out like Lindsay is crazy. Lindsay is a traitor. Lindsay is this and that. And I'm like, oh my gosh. So I start looking at what you were saying more closely, and I'm like, okay, woke right. But when you look at it from a factual perspective, the way you and the guys from Trigonometry there, the gentleman there, lay it out, it really makes sense. And the dangers of that is if it goes all the way and the crowd gets hold of it, because you know how the crowd is, especially on the populist side, right? I mean, it's happened to the left. The left's crowd has already done it.
That's right.
So the big danger is if the crowd gets a hold of this and starts worshiping it and applying it at its most extreme, we're in big trouble in this country, aren't we?
Yeah, so I see two big dangers. The message that they're using to sell it to the crowd is primarily there's no other way. We have to do this extremism. We have to do this radicalism. I understand that people see woke as a left phenomenon and right as a right phenomenon. So woke right doesn't make any sense, and it's stressful for them to hear that. But any group of people can become radicals. That's nothing new. And in this sense, woke basically means becoming a radical. It means waking up to the believing that you have to be a radical, meaning someone who wants to tear up the existing system by the roots and replace it with something different, that you have to be a radical and even an extremist to accomplish your goals. And so that's how they're selling it. There's no other way. We have to do this. So people like me, when they're not calling me a traitor or a Jew or some other thing, people like me are no solutions. We're doing great critiques, but we have no solutions. We're not offering any path out of the left wilderness. And that's part of their sales pitch. And so the two dangers that you end up with, one is what you said. We watched the left do this. We know exactly what it looks like when the crowd takes it up. I mean, the left lost its freaking mind. I mean, they're out there with drag queens in front of, little kids. They're pushing hard to this day. I mean, there's this big thing going on in Colorado today where they passed a law saying that, if you don't affirm your child in his transition, the state can take your kid away from you. This is happening to this day. They went all the way in, and they're still all the way in on this, and they're out burning Teslas and whatever else, which I thought the environmental stuff was their side. But I mean, they've completely lost their minds. And that could happen to the conservative party or conservative movement too, and it could happen to the Republican Party. You could get a small group of extremists who hijack the thing, and then everybody goes nuts and it falls apart because none of it's workable and it's all radical. And the second danger is related. Even if it doesn't get the crowd all the way, you only need so much of this stuff out there before your brand is getting to be a real problem. I'm hearing people all over the world right now saying the Trump administration's not doing enough to distance itself from anti-Semitism. Because has the Trump administration shown any anti-Semitism? No, not at all. No. One of the most pro-Israel administrations that we've ever had, working hand in glove with them. Just met with Benjamin Netanyahu yesterday with President Trump. And I don't know if you saw the menu, but it was hilarious. And so it's all these jokes, and they have a great relationship. So much so the Trump administration hasn't shown any anti-Semitic signs, but whatever this is, this woke right wing of MAGA, does it incessantly, especially on X more than anywhere else, but across social media. And it's a stain that the administration is going to get forced to either do something about or is going to get tarred with. And so you can undermine. What my point is, the second danger is that even if it doesn't take over, you get a certain amount of this negativity for a certain amount of time, this really ugly extremism, and your whole movement gets tarred with it, and you can't get it off of you at that point. And so what'll happen is if Trump waits too long, or if the administration waits too long to try to make a move against this, when they make the move, there'll be so much that the crowd is built up that it might be that split where half of the crowd goes off one way and half of the crowd goes off the other way. And now you've split your movement, and you're not going to win in 26, and you're not going to win in 28.
Yeah. Well, we got to take a commercial break, James. When we come back, though, I'm going to show a series of clips throughout the show in my cold opens. They're you, because there's not a lot of media coverage of this, but they're great clips. There is an ideology behind this, and I want to talk about that. And I want to talk some more about this Christian nationalism, anti-Semitism, and that kind of capturing, I think is the right word, of a message that is a reality in some ways, but is dangerous to run with it in the masses. And we'll be right back with Dr. James Lindsay. We're talking about the woke right.
Specific with that in a second. There's this kind of belief that there's this ruling class that's erected an ideology to marginalize people like them that sounds very much like woke, except instead of saying that it's like the white people the white ruling class created white supremacy to marginalize people of color, especially black and indigenous, and their ways of knowing from getting inside. The woke right, or the woke fascist side, says instead that following World War II, on the back of Hitler and the idea of never again, there was erected a post-war liberal consensus. Starting in the 1940s, immediately, starting in 1945, the creation of the United Nations was part of this. The signing on to the United Nations was part of this. They assigned Bill Buckley, to having done a route to drive the true conservatives to the margins so that a false post-war liberal consensus conservative movement could rise up, the neocons, and hold them out. So the neocons become this kind of hegemonic force within the conservative faction that edges out so-called true conservatism and these more dangerous, so to speak, ideas like fascist ideas, like Carl Schmitt's ideas about unbound executives and friend-enemy politics and so on, that these ideas all had to be pushed to the side on the pretext that World War II or a Adolf Hitler can never rise again. And so therefore, the true conservatives who represented conservative politics and kept at bay the beast of the left, which they say is that the right's true function is to keep at bay the left. In other words, to have a war, right versus left, with everybody in the middle, I guess, taking fire in the crossfire. But they believe that this post-war liberal consensus and the neoconservative movement literally was designed to marginalize their perspectives and to keep these other more radical right-wing ideas out of play. So this is a very woke way of thinking about the world, that there was a structural construction of the social and political and cultural environment designed to exclude people like them in order to be able to achieve certain political agendas. And now they believe that they've woken up to these ideas.
Welcome back to the Rob Maness Show. We're live on Worldview Tube and our X Spaces simulcast. And my guest today is Dr. James Lindsay, who you just heard right there, talking about the ideological perspective behind this so-called woke right movement, that we want to learn what it is so we can identify it. And we want to defeat it just as much as we need to defeat the woke left, which are communists. And if there are fascists growing in our movement, we need to identify them, just like the Americans identified fascism in World War II and communism afterwards, and have taken steps to defeat all of that. This is the same type of approach that I advocate that we use, which is why I wanted to have this show. And Dr. Lindsay, as you were talking there about this ideological move, in order for especially these young men to believe this ideology, they have to actually believe that all the way back to 1945, 46, 47 time frame, all of these structures have been invented and created just to keep their ideology, not ideology, but their belief system and the concepts that they believe in today down. Look, I was born in 1961, so I lived and grew up through a lot of that. And while I do not like the UN and would like to see it abolished, quite frankly, because of what it has become, I don't believe the structure was created just to keep these woke right men and women from becoming powerful. But it's kind of strange because they're like people in their 40s to 20s that are buying into this, from what I can tell.
Yeah, it seems there's a strong generational divide. And the thing is that all of these kinds of totalitarian movements, whether it's communism or fascism, what they do is they marry a truth to a lie. So it is true that Bill Buckley, William F. Buckley Jr., tried to lock down the conservative movement. He's really the father of the conservative movement. And he wanted to make sure that the John Birch Society and the racists and the anti-Semites and all of these, even proto-fascists and pro-fascist elements were not going to be part of the mainstream conservative movement that was going to be defined in terms of American values and in terms of free market capitalism and so on. And so this really did happen. He really did work to eject those people from holding positions of respectability within the Republican Party and the conservative movement that he was building. So there's a truth there. And the United Nations was designed, and a lot of the things that happened were designed to prevent the rise of fascism from happening again.
Right.
And the United Nations hasn't been exactly this angel organization even from its founding. You read its original documents, and there's a lot of evil woven into this program. There's a lot that advantages the communists. It's not clear to me how much the U.S. understood communism in 1945. It's certainly by the 1950s they had a pretty good grasp of it with dealing with the Soviet Union. But before that, it wasn't exactly clear how much they knew. So there's this truth and lie mixed together, and this creates a very dangerous but intoxicating kind of mythology. You tell this story, hey, look, people like you right now are excluded from being in full participation. There's a war on white people. Christians are being persecuted here in the United States just for their religion, blah, blah, blah. Men have been getting the short shrift for decades. Feminism has destroyed women and it's destroying men and all of this. And you can go down the whole list. There's all this homosexuality. There's all this whatever it happens to be, and point to all these things and say, this is why you can't succeed. And did you know there's this huge long story for how we got here? And that's where you start to sell the truth versus truth mixed with a lie. And what you can end up doing is radicalizing people to believe, oh my gosh, all of my problems come down to the fact that the world's organized against me and I've never known it. And so this is the essence of woke. And this is what really makes these people woke. Woke means woke up. So what Marxists teach is that there are two kinds of people in the world. And you could say friends and enemies, but the answer that I mean is there are people who have false consciousness because they accept the prevailing narrative about the world. And then you have people who have a true consciousness, or a critical consciousness, or a class consciousness, or a race consciousness, or a feminist consciousness. We could go down the list, but you have the awakened consciousness versus false consciousness. And so everybody who thinks, hey man, just get a job, do your best, work hard, try to build a family, the whole thing, they've just bought into the narrative that maintains the status quo from a woke view. And it doesn't matter if that woke view is left in which case they're going to say that's all identified with white supremacy and patriarchy and capitalism. Or if the radicals are on the right, in which case they're going to say that, well, that's the view that the neocons sold you and the classical liberals sold you all the way from the beginning of the post-war consensus, and that, look what it's done for you. It's got you nowhere. It doesn't matter which side it is. Woke means almost everybody except people who have our political beliefs have false consciousness about how the world works. So we're special, we're elite. We, by virtue of being awake, have authority to rule over other men. And so we need to be able to control the systems. This idea of decentralized power, divided powers, and everything always go out the window because the enlightened are the ones who have to rule.
Yeah, that's why I was saying before the show in my pre-show with my audience, I call myself an Americanist now. My now deceased friend Dennis Hall wrote a book called The Road to Americanism because it keeps me focused and guardrailed against these extraneous ideologies. What we're talking about, that on the left communism, on the right fascism, is where the extremes are, but it keeps me focused on what's important from an American perspective, and the separation of powers, life, liberty, the right to private property, those kind of things. Well, we got a couple of questions in the audience. I want to take one real quick, James. We do have a live audience over here. Go ahead. Rob is our host over there. Go ahead, Rob.
Hey, Colonel. We have Joseph.
Thank you very much, Colonel. Thank you very much. My question is, could you give us some examples of some of the bigger names on this woke right? And do you think that the woke right is kind of like the natural response to the constant pushing of the woke left? It's like the woke left actually sometimes gives birth to the woke right, just like in World War II with fascism and communism.
Yeah, sure. That's a good question. And thank you. There's two questions there, obviously. So I will name names in a second because it gets people ornery. And I will disclaim that most of the names I'm going to name, you've probably not heard of unless you're a little bit in the weeds, because it's a pretty kind of technical movement still. But on the other hand, some of the names I'm going to name you've definitely heard of, and you're not going to like it in all likelihood. But let's deal with is it a natural reaction? The answer is we have lots of natural reactions. If I take and whack your knee with a reflex hammer, your leg's going to kick. And if I'm your doctor and I whack you in the knee with the reflex hammer, your leg's going to kick. But if you kick me in the face, you probably did it on purpose. So there's this idea that there is a natural reaction that you get pushed really hard one way, that you're going to come back the other way. Oh, yeah, we were too open. And let's use the example of feminism. We were too aggressive about putting women in positions of power. That was obviously a mistake. We have all these problems, some of which we can relate to that. Let's go the other way and get women out of positions of power. That's sort of a reaction. And whether it's the correct answer or not, that's beside the point. That it's a natural reaction is true. Right. But the thing is you can also take a natural reaction and feed into it. If you and I are going to do since this is kind of military and it's a organization, if you and I are in a wrestling match, which is a proxy for any military conflict, including a psychological warfare battle space, if I can pull you a little bit off your balance and make you step somewhere wrestling that you don't want to go, I can easily take your misstep and throw you off balance. If I can trick you into pushing me, if I'm ready for it, I can turn and throw you over my hip, for example, wrestling. So I can use your momentum against you. And this is what I would argue happened in pre-World War II as well, that forces, including Hitler and including Mussolini, were actually taking the natural reaction of the Germans and the Italians against what was going on in Europe and taking it much further than was the correct solution. We know it's not the correct solution because of the results that it got, but that doesn't mean that the impulse to go that way is not natural. So the answer is yes and no. It's a natural reaction that's then amplified. It's like lighter fluid being sprayed onto a fire. Isn't a fire the natural reaction? Well, if you spray it with lighter fluid and it burns the whole house down, that wasn't exactly the same as lighting a candle. And so it's not yes and no is the answer to that question. And then also, just to add to it, that doesn't make it right. You know, your natural impulse, if you're across from some guy and he insults your mother, is to punch him in the mouth, but it doesn't mean it's the right thing to do in that moment or maybe ever. It's often a lot of times better to restrain yourself from your natural impulse because it might be an error. It could be a setup even, where the second you touch him, you get arrested or something like that. Now, who's pushing these kind of ideologies? Well, it's a little bit niche. I see a lot of it coming out of the Blaze. R.N. McIntyre is a guy on the Blaze. I name names, by the way. He pushes this ideology unrepentantly. He pushes philosophers like Carl Schmitt and like Thomas Carlyle. Thomas Carlyle's a Scottish philosopher who's considered the father of fascism. He's talked about Julius Evola, if I'm not mistaken, who was a fascist and mystic in Italy. You'll see other people, I don't want to name for sure, that Aaron has talked about some of these characters, but you'll see other people pushing, not just Carl Schmitt, who's very, very popular at the Blaze right now, but you'll see them put, and he, by the way, is the crown jurist of the Third Reich and came up with the idea of the friend-enemy distinction in politics and the unbound executive through the state of exception, which means all of a sudden there's an emergency, so the executive gets to act like a tyrant. So that's that guy. They also push, like I said, Julius Evola. Gaetano Mosca is an elite theorist from Italy that was a precursor to fascist thought. You will see them actually pushing the thought of and trying to launder the thought of Mussolini and Hitler, and Franco is a very popular character, not that he was much of a philosopher as well. And there's other names that we could get into. But so R.N. McIntyre has pushed it. There's a school of thought, not everybody there, but at the Lotus Eaters in Britain, mostly pushes a postmodern right. Nate Fisher, Josh Abatoy, working with American Reformer. I guess that would also include Aaron Wrenn, who's called for conservatives to align with FDR and to adopt critical theory and postmodernism and some of the critiques of Marx. But more, that's kind of in the Christian nationalist vein. You have Stephen Wolfe wrote The Case for Christian Nationalism with the endorsement of Yoram Hazony, who works with J.D. Vance and has created NatCon. And then you have let's see, there's another name I wanted to catch in there. Oh, William Wolfe is working at the Center for Baptist Leadership to bring this in through the faith office that Donald Trump has created. Turns out American Reformer is closely related to the Center for Baptist Leadership. They may even share an EIN number, so that's worth looking into. All those names are kind of niche. More popular names that people would recognize, I would name unequivocally characters like Daryl Cooper, who's this World War II amateur revisionist historian that's saying that Churchill may have been the chief villain of World War II on podcasts like Tucker Carlson's and now Joe Rogan's. Ian Carroll, who pushes an anti-Israel, basically anti-Israel line in every single thing that he can possibly find. This conspiratorial anti-Israel vein of it. I would name Tucker Carlson, Candace Owens. These are both characters that are kind of pushing in that direction. Tucker is very interesting. He's had this maneuver that he's played out, and it'd be a fun project that would take a lot of time to do well, but to go through a lot of his interviews that he's done over the last 3 to 4 years and show how many of these characters that push these extremist positions that he's platformed on his podcast, and which is fine, interview people, right? But then to give them extremely softball interviews with no pushback, which is a kind of concerning thing. So I place him on this side, and that's the one that usually people get mad about. People are a little suspicious of Candace, not so suspicious of, they're a little suspicious of Candace. They're not as suspicious of Tucker yet, but I think that Tucker is actually part and parcel of this movement. He's platformed Charles Haywood, who has funded a lot of these guys. He was a former CEO of Mansfield King Shampoo Company. So he has given a ton of money to these projects. He's helped American Reformer get off the ground, for example. And I guess the list could go on with the smaller, less notable names, but these have all been on Tucker's podcast. This past week, he had Andrew Isker, who goes by Boniface Option. And Andrew Isker is one of these Christian nationalist pastors. I guess he's in West Tennessee now, but he's originally from Minnesota. The idea of the Boniface Option looks back to a character named Boniface who was trying to drive the pagans out of Germany and cut down their famous tree. So they'll symbolize themselves with an axe by a tree on X. And so it's fairly fringe views. And again, just elevated on huge platforms, and allowed to progress without being asked any difficult questions, like for their support for, or their lack of support for the Constitution, and their support for in the case of Charles Haywood, Franco, in the case of Daryl Cooper, fascism, and it's pretty alarming.
Yeah, it is. It is alarming, you know. And when I first started noticing Tucker Carlson himself, and look, I'm a fan of Tucker Carlson. I'm a subscribed to his network, and I listen to him and everything. But I don't agree with him on everything either. I completely, we're on opposite sides on Israel's right to defend itself and right. I don't know where he's at on right to exist, but definitely its right to defend itself. But we agree on the Ukraine war completely.
Sure.
They're a little, if anything, and I think that's one of the things that I wanted to dig at a little bit. We got to take a break here real quick, but and that is, James, how do we filter through the things that are true and the lies? Because, like, for instance, white men have been attacked through policy and law because the Marxists got control of the government for 4 years. That's my opinion under the Biden administration. And some might even say the Obama administration have embedded a lot of this stuff in law now that is hurting white males or white people when it comes to things like getting into colleges or service academies and those kind of things. And we're beating it back. But those truths give the ability to this ideology, this movement on the woke right, like you said, that they can come in and weave the lies in and get people to believe, well, this is the way we have to go. And it's not the way we have to go. We'll be right back with James Lindsay on the Rob Maness Show. It's Training Tuesday, identifying the woke right and defeating it.
Hello, I'm Brandon House. Is the government tracking you? Do they have access to all your data? Well, if you go to worldviewtalk.com, you'll find out about a cell phone company that, well, does not store your data. They don't do that. This is what they're known for. They don't store your data. You have privacy. You're not being tracked. That's why a lot of folks are turning to worldviewtalk.com. You'll find their prices are very competitive. All the details are there at worldviewtalk.com. Again, worldviewtalk.com. Oh, while you're there, not only do they have cell phones that aren't tracking you, you can find out about how to get a satellite phone. Should the whole system go down and you want to communicate with a family member or a loved one, you might want to have a satellite phone. Or how about their solar generators? They have great solar generators. Check them all out right now. Worldviewtalk.com, worldviewtalk.com.
And then there's the philosophical, deeper aspect. Why woke? What does woke mean? Woke up to a structural politics that marginalizes people like me. And we need to band together in solidarity, no enemies to the right, in order to be able to create a powerful enough oppressed coalition to flip over the power structure by putting ourselves at the center and claiming power for ourselves. This is explicitly woke, having a critical consciousness about the way the world is organized. Tucker Carlson, for example, if you listen to Tucker, a lot of people really like Tucker. Tucker is pretty critical of America. He's not doing a Howard Zinn critical America theory. Howard Zinn being the one who wrote the People's History, so the Marxist history of the United States, propaganda. He's writing a different critical history of the United States. Well, the Constitution was, not really adequate to prevent all of this. There is a post-World War II liberal consensus or world order that we're all being made subject to. Well, look at how America was involved in all of these things. America bad, America bad, America bad. Also, the UK was pretty bad too, and America bad, America bad. There's this kind of constant critical negativity. You see some of these characters, I mentioned Tucker Carlson, but you see some of these characters like Stephen Wolfe, who wrote the book The Case for Christian Nationalism, has put multiple times on social media, and I don't know what he said in public talks. I've only heard one of his public talks, but you see him on social media saying more than once that he has adopted critical theory specifically for his own purposes and to his own ends. He was recently saying on social media, somebody sent it to me, so I have to, I guess, confirm this, but he was saying that, in fact, the critical theory he uses is not the perverted version of critical theory that the left has used. It's its own more correct version of critique that goes back before the left, yada, yada. And so how do you not call the attempt to awaken a critical consciousness of the power structure that you believe has delegitimized your movement? How do you not call that woke, when woke means having awoken to a critical consciousness that there's a structural force that has delegitimized people in your political positionality? It's the exact same thing, unfortunately. It's just pushing a people in place kind of driven fascism as opposed to a we're going to end all oppression by becoming the oppressor's communist.
Welcome back to the Rob Maness Show, and we're talking about the concept of the woke right that's been going around for much more than just the last few months and everything. And Dr. James Lindsay, who you just saw there, talking about the philosophy behind it, which is a very good explanation. It helped me understand it when I first watched it and listened to him, because it's identical to what we've seen on the woke left and woke communism and Marxism. And those characters and their characterizations that have taken hold, even as I mentioned before the break, have gotten written into law. And that's the problem. And Dr. Lindsay is my guest today. Dr. Lindsay, like you say in your bio, you're hated by everybody, I think, or canceled by everybody.
Canceled, not hated. In fact, I'm pretty popular with Jewish people right now because I've stood up against this anti-Semitism that we're seeing on both sides. So that's pretty good. I have some friends.
One of the things that bothers me about all this is, look, I think I've heard Donald Trump say he's a Christian nationalist. I believe in my nation. I consider myself, I guess, a nationalist, not in an ideological perspective, but somebody that just believes adamantly and aggressively in the concept of the United States of America and all those values I mentioned that underpin it, that make me an Americanist. But I'm a Christian too, so I could easily say, without intending to be something negative, that I'm a Christian nationalist. How do we filter through all that so that we're not getting in screaming matches with people that we know are good people on the Christian side or the nationalist side, while at the same time we guard against things like anti-Semitic actions and things that lead to things like the Holocaust, because it's extremely important that we do that. We don't want a Holocaust of any people. It's not just you Jewish people I'm concerned about. I don't want a Holocaust on the white people of the United States of America, which could easily happen based on what we've seen from the left in the last 15, 20 years.
Yeah, so the answer to your question, how do we pick through this, is tedious and annoying, unfortunately, but it's that we all have to be very intentional with our language, and we have to be very intentional with how we engage with each other around language. The way that these tricks work, whether on left or right, and I can give you a dozen examples from the left, in my sleep, is that the words that are being used are being misused by the activists, and they're being used roughly correctly by normal people. And this has got a fancy name in the linguistics literature. They call it conceptual polysemy. It's fancy, means you mean more than one thing at one time with what you're saying. Okay, so or you use a term that you mean something specific, like diversity, that doesn't actually mean diversity. You use a term that has a specific meaning, knowing that the person hearing you thinks you mean something different. So the way that you have to pick through this is by getting very intentional. So when you hear a phrase like Christian nationalist, which is very inconvenient at, a casual conversation at a dinner table or whatever, you actually have to stop and say, well, what do you mean by that? And then you have to have the courage. I mentioned on that clip, the no enemies to the right, netter. The left used no enemies to the left. It didn't matter how radical they were on your side, so you didn't criticize them. That comes from that philosophy of Carl Schmitt, the friend-enemy distinction. And so the point is that what we have to do is not that. What you have to do is somebody says, well, I think I'm a Christian nationalist. And you say, well, yes, sir. What do you mean by that? And then you say, well, I think, I believe in America and I really believe in our values and I'm a Christian. So I'm a Christian who is an American nationalist. So I guess that makes me a Christian nationalist. You say, well, okay, I agree with that. That's fine. But then they maybe say something different, though. Maybe they say, I believe every American needs to be a Christian. You say, well, how are you going to achieve that? Now you have a different conversation on your hands. Or they might say, I believe that the government should be a Christian theocracy or something to that effect. And then you might say, well, that's not what we do here in America, and I disagree with that. So we have to ask people, what do you mean by that? a whole lot more often before we decide to agree or disagree when they use some specialized term of art. Because so much of it comes down to this lying through language that we share with meanings that we don't share, or as the old phrase goes, this was an old criticism that the Christians gave of the Mormons almost 100 years ago, I think, is that they said that Mormons share your vocabulary, but they don't share your dictionary. And this is true of communists, and it's true of all that they share your vocabulary, but they don't share your dictionary. They mean something different by your words. And fascists use the same trick. And like I said, in linguistics, it's got a fancy name, doesn't matter what it is. But this is a tactic. This is a deceptive tactic that radicals and extremists will use to recruit people further and further into their belief system until you find it's hard to extract yourself, because your social relationships, your professional environment all depend on you having continued down the line of using the words, even when you later figure out that they don't mean what you thought they meant.
Yeah, it's amazing when you start thinking about it and really listening to yourself, really. And you go look in the mirror and go, well, that's not really me when I hear those words from this person or from this perspective. Here's what I mean. But we got another question in the audience. I want to go ahead and take that real quick. Go ahead.
We have Lady Wings, Colonel.
Good afternoon, Colonel, and thank you, Rob, for having this space. I have learned so much. I believe, or I'm of the mind that the only way that we're going to be able to oversee this explosion of people thinking that they know what they're talking about, when all as they are is talking circles around people and their insecurities. I have so many questions and so little time. I'm of the mind we are all one race, the human race. And if we don't take care of each other,
right,
we don't have a future. And I thank you for you taking the time to teach me these things, because I have learned much in the past 20 minutes just by listening to you gentlemen talk.
Lady, do we have a question?
I won't remember what you say.
Do you have a question?
Yes. With all the humanity that we've lost, how do we get that back in order to step up and make people believe in reality again?
That's a great question.
Yeah, so my answer basically is I don't mean to sound like I'm shilling here, but I'm going to talk positively about two institutions. One is the Christian church and the other is the United States military. As it turns out, the military has a secret sauce for making a bunch of people dragged in from all different places get along and be able to get mission success, which is that they put them in conditions where they're there together in person, interacting with goal-oriented behaviors. You've got to get, if it's in the Air Force, you got to get all these jets off of this base right now because there's whatever, or you got to do this, or you got to do that. You got to climb over that wall and jump through this puddle or whatever it is. You got to make it to the end of the day. Everybody has to make it through. All these things, these are team building exercises when they're at the level of exercises, not, actual missions. And what they do is when people work together and point toward common goals, they come together and they find each other's humanity. And I think it's absolutely important that we start working less online as much as possible and getting involved with other human beings face to face to achieve things. People say stuff's broken all over the place. Well, that means it's time to start making organizations and getting involved in your communities and building your communities better, whether it's beautification, whether it's fixing up broken buildings, whether it's helping feed the homeless or the poor, whatever it happens to be, getting involved, or whether it's taking a political action committee, getting involved in person with each other will bring people together and you start to see each other in a different way. So that's what I learned from watching how the military is able to get its units to be highly functional. And then the Christian church has this idea of when you're ready to come together, and we're going to have community. And if you're ready to repent, we're ready to forgive. And when you adopt that attitude, it doesn't matter that your friend or your neighbor lost their mind during COVID and said horrible things to you. When they come to you and they're ready to say, I'm sorry, and you're ready to say, you want to go bowling, then you've got a relationship starting to build again. The past can be put in the past, but so the Christian model of encouraging repentance and then encouraging forgiveness to those who are willing to put it forth, and actually, in a sense, at least within yourself internally, to forgive people ahead of time, breaks down a lot of those barriers. It opens up doors to go connect. It's not going to be fast. We're not going to heal as a people in a year. But what we, I think, need to be aware of it in the context of the conversation we're having now is that more extremism is very unifying for the people that get in it, but is ultimately very divisive in the long run. And it's not a long run viable solution. The Nazi experiment proves that. People got very unified in Germany, but it tore all of Europe apart. And then when it all fell apart in 1945, at the end of World War II, Germany was torn to shreds. And so in the end, it didn't work out. So we want to try to find universal principles. This is why I like your Americanist thing. I see myself the same way, Colonel. I think that this kind of a attitude is going to be very, very healthy for us, and that over time we can work our way. But an attitude of forgiveness, an attitude of working together toward common goals, I think will be necessary to start to knit us back together.
Yeah, and that's amazing because you're not a Christian, are you? James?
No, sir, I'm not, but I find an awful lot of value in it. It makes an awful lot of sense.
You just captured what a lot of people that are even say they're Christians today, and especially people on the left that say they're tolerant, you just captured what Jesus Christ was all about: repentance and forgiveness. You can't just have forgiveness and tolerance. You have to have repentance that goes with it. There are parables all over the Bible where it has Jesus saying, "Go and sin no more," and then forgiving somebody. And that is the essence of Christianity that transcends all denominations, all churches, etc., and all the ideology, the propaganda, the narrative, the dogma, that carves out what the essence of Jesus Christ and Christianity really is. So
Christianity does a magical thing that it encourages everyone to remember that they themselves are sinners, and therefore everyone is in need of repentance. And so when you repent, maybe, you think, well, they went crazy during COVID and they were awful and I didn't, and I was nice, and so I don't need to repent. Well, if you figure out, it doesn't have to be for your behavior during COVID, but if you show repentance, it will stimulate other people to think, well, maybe I can, humble myself. Repentance is a humbling act, and somebody's not going to automatically humble themselves in front of other people. But if you've already done it, if you've already made yourself humble, then they'll be far more likely to step into that vulnerability and reciprocate.
Absolutely. And I appreciate what you said about the military. I've spent over 30 decades of my life in the Air Force. My dad spent more than 2 decades of his life in the military, and our family goes way back to 1775. But and that's why the way you explained it is the reason why those of us that have been fighting against diversity, equity, and inclusion training and indoctrination policy inside the Department of Defense, because it divides. And the essence of winning in combat is being able to build those teams that are trusting and loyal to each other in peacetime in order to win in combat. You cannot win with a divided team, and that philosophy and that ideology divides. The question I have is how do we address, and I think I know the answer to this because I've seen you perform at the Oxford, I think it's the Oxford Union is what it's called in the debate. But how do we as a society return to what I used to see as a kid in the United States Senate, where I would see Sam Nunn and a Republican have a civil debate without any underlying nefarious intentions. It was an honest debate about the direction that a certain policy or law should go, but in a way that used no profanity, no raised voices. And look, I'm as guilty as the next guy of saying, hey, we got to respond in kind sometimes to some of these things. But really, that's something that, while it's going to happen, and I expect it to happen, including with myself, because I'm human, that's not the goal. The goal should really be to get back to civil discourse. And I don't use that word to point at your website, but, new discourses is something that I got onto a long time ago. and I push people to take a look at it. But civil discourse in this country was at one time so highly respected that even when things did get out of control, like in the Congress, when somebody got hit with a cane and things, it always was able to rebalance itself. And how do we get back to that? Because I'm not so sure we can do that at this point in our country's history.
Yeah, I think of that story with the cane a lot. That was Sam Houston. I went to Sam Houston Elementary School, as a matter of fact. So we grew up with stories of Sam Houston. He's from my town. He's my guy. So I think of that a lot when Congress is all out of order and it's all crazy. You know, somebody's eyelash got flying and people calling each other names. And I'm like, well, nobody said you rascal and beat somebody almost to death, another congressman almost to death with a cane carved from Andrew Jackson's hickory trees at Hermitage. But so it's been wild in the past. It'll be wild sometimes. But I think that the answer is that we've got to look, not to sound like Kamala Harris, because that's all communist fake, but we got to get to the root cause of why this is so divided. And you just were talking about how DEI brings division. Well, a lot of people don't know, and it's not the subject of today's show because we're getting out of time, but the DEI was a program called Korenizatsiya in Soviet Union, and it was literally a program implemented by Stalin in order to use the ethnic minority groups in order to leverage power for the communists. And this was a program that both Lenin and Stalin implemented through the 1920s. You can look up the history of it. And what you said about it is true. Its goal is actually to cause division in the name of unity. And so we have to get to programs like that. Another thing that causes division is existential fear. If you believe that the other side is going to be the end of your way of life and is going to destroy you, you've fallen into Carl Schmitt's idea of the friend-enemy distinction, where politics becomes a zero-sum fight, literally a battle between people who are enemies of your way of life and people who are friends. And what we've got to realize is that this intention to dive into personal identity as a political force, that's divisive and prevents us from being able to get back to civil debate. You can't debate something that's a core of who you are. And then this is what they always say. You're going to you say trans people don't exist. You threaten our existence or whatever with your policies. And on the other hand, you can't debate when you think that if the other side is given an inch, they're going to destroy the world. And the problem with a Marxist provocation on a society is that's exactly what's happening. If you give the Marxists an inch, they will actually destroy your society. And it's a huge problem. But what we have to do is start to, as everyday Americans, is we have to start eschewing extremism and identity politics. Both of those two poisons are preventing us from being able to have reasoned discourse and debate about issues and policy. You lose the debate over an issue the second you're arguing about identity. And if you think it's all existential, that's coming from extremists. Extremists are the only ones who pose an existential threat. If we want to have a prosperous and tolerant society with lots of different perspectives that make America great, then we're going to have to get the extremists to be something that we're not all that excited about putting up with. And those are the people that push to the margins, is extremism. So I think if we adopt an attitude against extremism, doesn't mean you're not stalwart against extremists and not willing to stand up straight and say no. And if we avoid the identity politics, I think we'll be a lot better off, and we'll be a few years away from having proper, good debate again over real policy issues.
Yeah, and I just got to go back to my term, especially my friend Dennis Haas' term, Americanist. I've been called an extremist. I'm sure you're aware. You have too, by the left in the media and a whole bunch of other things, because they love to use their pejoratives to discount you and discount me and discount our ideas. And that's the danger right there. Everybody needs to get back to the Americanist view. And push out on the sides to those keep those extremes out there. Well, James, thank you so much for coming today. I've had at Conceptual James up on the screen and New Discourses. We've talked about that. Go to the website, folks, and subscribe to that. It's a great website, and we appreciate it. Where are you going to be physically next? You mentioned getting together in person. I'm a big believer in that, doing more of that than less of it myself.
Yeah, I just left a big conference in Atlanta for the international, or what's it called? The Independent Medical Association. Used to be called the FLCCC, the COVID doctors that pushed ivermectin for everybody. I went to their big conference. So that was last weekend. The next one, I've got a little bit of time off, but it looks like I'm going to go speak for PragerU pretty soon out in Orange County, California, and get together with a bunch of those people and hopefully make a difference for them. But I've got a busy summer coming up all over, not just the U.S. but around the world. I'll be going back to New Zealand to speak with them and their big conservative political parties having me down to speak at their national convention, do a tour of the country. So I'm going to be kind of all over the place starting in June and July.
Well, I appreciate you. Stay safe out there. Hopefully we'll cross paths again soon.
Yes, sir. I hope so.
Yeah. Well, folks, tomorrow's Whistleblower Wednesday. Adam Swart, who's the founder of Crowds on Demand. Yes, the protests this weekend, the hands-off one, they were paid for. This man is going to tell us how it's done because he refused to do it in this case, and he runs a company that provides paid protesters. We'll see you then.